Hi, my name is Todd Wright. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Progress. Welcome to our webinar, Ask Me Anything, Bridging the Data Gap for Analytics Programs. And now to introduce our speaker for today, Dennis Bennett. Dennis Bennett is a Principal Sales Engineer at Progress. Dennis has over 20 years actually of experience working with companies to help solve their data connectivity challenges. In the past, he's worked as an application developer, DBA, and a QA engineer. At Progress Software, he is a principal sales engineer, as I mentioned, for the data connectivity and integration products. Dennis, with all that said, I'll pass it over to you, and I'll be back on the webinar when we get to the Q&A portion. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Todd. So today we're going to be talking about bridging the data gap, making it easier to reach hard to reach data. This is an area that Progress DataDirect has specialized in pretty much for our entire history. You can see there are a number of different categories that we deal with, starting at the bottom actually with the relational kind of databases. That's where we all began with it. But over time, we have added big data, and today the focus will be on REST APIs and potentially applications, SaaS applications, but maybe not the super large ones, maybe more bespoke applications that it may be difficult to find connectivity for. Just to kind of go over what we do supply connectivity for, we have a number of commercial drivers. You can see the different categories kind of aligning what we just talked about before, relational, SaaS, cloud, big data, and data warehouses, particularly cloud data warehouses. And we are going to focus today on the autonomous REST connector, though, which is a product we have that enables end users or other software vendors to basically build their own driver for a data source that maybe we don't have a connector for, and maybe it's a one-off, maybe it's a smaller, kind of more boutique application where it's unlikely that a software vendor will actually build a commercial driver for it. And with the autonomous REST connector, you're able to get to these kind of more esoteric, kind of hard to reach data sources. So just kind of the challenges we see, and I think, if you're on this webinar, you're probably very familiar with just the onslaught of new technologies, new data sources we've seen over the last 10 and possibly, 15 years now. For a long time, things were pretty stable. Relational databases is a number of kind of big hitters in that space that people use. But over time, that changed. We certainly saw, a rise in open source data sources, initially relational data sources. We also saw a rise of things like SaaS applications, software as a service applications. And what we see with these is they typically will expose data via an API, and most frequently REST, which is great, but it can be difficult to integrate with those. And if you can see on this slide here, what we're finding is we did a kind of a survey for a number of our customers and people we deal with, and believe there was over 600 responses, and you can see over a third of them found it either extremely or somewhat difficult to bring a new data source into the organization. And typically the difficulty with that is in integration and kind of connecting it to the tools you're used to using and the users being able to get value out of it. Definitely it's of no value to bring in a new data source and have it be a silo where it's very difficult to get connectivity to it, get reliable understanding of the data, and be able to make good business decisions. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So as I mentioned, we've seen over the last 10 or more years, a big rise in software as a service applications. But one thing we see that is not really a surprise, because I've definitely been seeing it as I've been dealing with customers and prospects over the last few years, is we're seeing more internal REST applications, basically something that people have built in-house just because the needs are very specific to their company or industry. And that is often more difficult to get to. But at the same time, it's extremely important that this data is accessible and usable, and people are able to use it to make decisions with it, make good business decisions. And you can see it's rare to have just internal APIs or just external. Really, by far, we see most people doing a combination. And we're going to talk mostly about the internal, though we'll also talk a little bit about some of the external ones that maybe are not, the top 50 SaaS applications where, it's specific to an industry, but at the same time, it's very important for the users of it to be able to fully leverage the data and make decisions based on it. So as I mentioned, the Autonomous REST Connector is the tool we have to enable you to be able to discover these different REST endpoints and be able to create a connector that you can then turn around and access via SQL, via ODBC or JDBC. The benefit of that is this is a near universal standard, and pretty much every tool that your customers, particularly BI tools, will support this, and your end users have probably been using it for a number of years. And this allows these new internal applications that are so important to give you the same access that you've been used to. And we've done webinars in the past on Autonomous REST Connector, and we've spent a lot of time focusing on these very popular SaaS applications that people want to get understandings of, they want to get full access to. But today we'll be talking more about some of these internal ones that, you're going to be hard pressed to find a connector for, but at the same time, you've got a number of tools that you need to be able to get at this data and be able to use it and be able to get business value from it. So that's kind of be the focus for today. As a reminder, if you're familiar with REST, with the Autonomous REST Connector, or if this is your first time looking at it, the way it works is we're able to use the Autonomous REST Connector composer to be able to sample data. So first we would authenticate, so we would be able to get data back. We would send, using the composer, you would send a REST request, you would get the data back, whether it's the response is JSON, XML, or CSV. And from that, the Autonomous REST Connector will be able to normalize that. And the reason this is necessary is REST responses can be extremely complex. They can be, it's a document structure, but people will embed documents within documents, multiple layers deep, which makes it difficult for tools that are wanting to use SQL to be able to make sense of that data. So the normalization is where we will basically create child tables and build all the metadata to allow basically to put that data together and make it usable for BI tools. And so from the sampling process, we're going to understand, where the endpoints are. We'll gather from this, we'll often gather the different filters that are available for this REST service, REST endpoint. You can configure it to handle the pagination, which is very frequently used. It's a best practice for creating REST sources that may return large amounts of data. And from that, we'll, basically normalize out into the tables. And we will also write all this information to a model file, including things like the columns, any kind of indexes, the data types for that. This is all inferred from the sampling process. We've been doing this for a number of years, and the inference is good, though if for some reason you don't like the structure we've come up with, you can certainly edit it either in the composer, or you can use basically a text editor to modify this model file. But once that's done, the sampling process is over. You're able to connect via ODBC or JDBC using the same model file and get to these REST sources as if it was just another relational database. So as I mentioned before, we focused in the past on some of the more popular SaaS applications, and we've actually pre-built some of these models for you, where we've actually gone out and sampled it for it. You would consider these to be templates, because it's very possible that you will have endpoints that we didn't have when we sampled, but it would be a pretty much like an 80% or better starting point, where you can start with this and then add to it any kind of new REST endpoints that you might have that we don't have in the model. But again, What we're going to focus today on is not the most popular SaaS applications where there are models or connectors. We're going to focus on internal ones or even possibly external, but maybe less standard, less kind of usage out in the real world. And so the first thing, as I mentioned, how do they differ from these more popular SaaS applications? First of all, nobody is building commercial connectors for them or drivers. So you kind of have to figure out your own way. And that's sort of how we talk about some of the difficulty in getting to some of this data and the need to bridge the gap. Yeah, I mentioned these may not be, hugely used out in the industry, but at the same time, they are extremely important to the companies that are using them. Often, it could be ERP applications, it could be financial REST sources kind of dealing with high finance, things like that. So it's very common that this authentication and authorization procedures are somewhat complex. I've seen cases where there are multiple steps involved in authentication. For example, somebody would send in credentials to a REST service, get okayed on that, and then turn around and have to access a vault to get other OAuth 2 credentials to be able to then generate OAuth 2 tokens to be used in authorization. So it can be difficult to kind of take care of these and to support these kind of complex authentications. At the same time, though, because of the sensitivity of the data, it's not there for no reason. It's very important that there is this extra security around it. And that's what that OAuth 2++ is saying. Basically, it's not uncommon to see something that is very much like OAuth 2, but there are other facets involved with it, whether it's extra fields in the body that is passed to the authentication service, or whether it's extra HTTP headers. There's a lot involved in there. The other thing we'll see is sometimes just non-standard filtering. It just makes it more difficult. REST is a wide open standard, and you can pretty much take care of filtering any way you want, and sometimes people will basically do whatever they want in that. So I've definitely seen cases where they'll put filters in a post body, but at the same time also put them in query parameters in the URL. I've sometimes seen query parameters using OData syntax rather than equal signs. It would be like an EQ or things like that. And less frequently, I've even seen information to be used in filtering passed in HTTP headers. And finally, the other non-standard thing we sometimes see with these internal apps is REST applications is non-standard HTTP status messages. For example, when a token expires, rather than returning a 401, which says you need to re-authenticate, it might pass back a 403, which says, I know who you are, but you're not allowed to access this, which is not legitimate. But we can typically work around a lot of these things. And so the question is, I need to get to this data from BI tools. Why can't I go directly to it? And I mentioned some of the issues there. It's a standard, but it's a wide open standard. And as such, it's very difficult for BI tools to provide universal REST access. If you look out there, you'll see different levels of support for REST data. OData is a kind of a unique format of REST, and there'll typically be support for that. So if you have an application that can return OData, you may be okay with it. I don't see it that often. I see more kind of just generalized REST. The other downside of OData support in BI tools is you don't get to use live data. It basically will pull an extract in, and you'll work with data from that extract, which will often it'll go stale over time. And the other thing is, if you want to update it, you have to bring everything back in. So not ideal. Tableau specifically has something called web data connectors. In the past, it was a 2.0 specification. It was fairly simple. It's now been deprecated. Again, though, that was extract only. There's a newer one, Web Data Connector 3.0, which uses a software developer kit to build Tableau connector or Taco files. So it's definitely more robust, but it's, you have to use an SDK. So there's a lot more involved to it. And again, it's extract only. So that's typically not ideal for people. So what Autonomous REST Connector does is standardizes these kind of non-standard applications, very important applications, but they're very different, and everything is, a unique integration effort. So SQL is a pretty much, I said near universal, but I've never seen a BI tool that does not support SQL, and that'll be through either ODBC or JDBC. And then to improve the integration with some of the more popular BI tools, for Tableau, we supply a Tableau data source customization file, a TDC file, and this basically tells Tableau server or Tableau desktop basically what exactly does the ARC driver support as far as SQL. Without this, it'll still work. Tableau will do a bunch of discovery queries at connect time to kind of understand the capabilities of the driver. So it makes sense to basically tell it ahead of time exactly how the driver works. In the case of Power BI, we provide with the Autonomous REST connector a direct query custom connector, which by default, if you're doing a generic ODBC connection with Power BI, you're stuck dealing with extracts and not live data. But using the direct query custom connector that comes with ARC, you're able to actually deal with live data. And this is just showing in Power BI, when you do a get data, how you can see, rather than doing generic ODBC, you can get direct query with ARC. And we have a number of other of the DataDirect drivers that also have direct query custom connectors. So at this point, I want to do a demonstration, just kind of showing a little bit about how this might work. I've kind of created an internal ERP application, basically for like an electronics company, showing sales and customers and stores and things like that. The authentication is a bearer token. It's actually a JWT, a Java Web Token, or a JOT. And I will use that to authenticate, and I can just show you just really quickly the process in the ARC Composer to pull it in and start sampling, and then show you, based on the model created, how you could drop it in a SQL test tool and just get understanding of your data a little bit easier. And I'll show you just a simple Tableau worksheet or a workbook that was created with that. So at this point, let me get out of here and show you. So I'm showing you now Insomnia, which is a REST tool. Basically, I can, similar to Postman, I can point to an endpoint, and you can see I've got an endpoint here. I've got progresserp.com listening up port 3000, my application, and I've got an endpoint here for top sales products, and you can just see some of the data that comes back. And this data is actually fairly easily fit into a relational structure. Sometimes we see stuff, as I mentioned before, where it's very complex. So I've got like 9 different endpoints here. You can see I've got some information about customer sales. I've got information about the stores and the different products and so forth. And basically what I'll show you is bringing up the ARC Composer to actually start sampling some of these endpoints. So let me jump to a browser, and I've brought up the ARC Composer here. You can see I've got, these are the models we kind of showed you before. I'll show you the process to create a model though. So I'm just going to click here to create a model, and I'll just give it a name. I can give it a base URL here. So might be useful if I've got, for example, an application that's got dev test prod internally. I could basically use the same model for that and just change the base URL, assuming that that's the difference between them. But anyway, let me come in here. And as I mentioned, if I want to sample the data, obviously I have to authenticate. So, and I also said I've got a bearer token. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that and paste that in, because I'm not going to get any data back without it. And let me bring that in here. And at this point, I'm ready to start sampling endpoints. So let me grab I showed you the 9 different endpoints over there. I'm going to go ahead and look at products. So basically, it's a get verb, which, if you notice, is what I was showing you in Insomnia. And I'm going to go out for the products. And you can see it come back in a relational kind of format. If we look at the raw view, we can see this is kind of matches up what we saw before in Insomnia, just the REST response. And I could go through basically sampling the other 8 like this, but let me just do, actually, I'm going to bring in one I've done before. Basically, I'm going to choose the model, and I've got one here, and I'm going to paste it in. You can see I've got a base URL here, Progress ERP, and I say, okay, I need to bring in my token again. So let's go back here and grab the token. This is just white on white. That's why it's kind of showing like that. And if I come to configure endpoints, we can see the different endpoints. So there's exchange rate. It builds an entity relationship diagram too, just kind of showing you just the different tables. In the case where the response was very complex, I might normalize out into multiple tables from a single REST endpoint, and this would show all of the foreign key and such primary key information there. And I can come in here and take a look at some of the metadata. So if I go ahead and let's just look at products again, I just double click it, and I can just run a quick test here, and you can see it comes back. So it's good for a quick smoke test just to make sure I've got what I want. But now, as I'm ready to go, what I can do is grab this connection string. It's just a JDBC URL. And the other thing I would do is I would download my model. You can see I just put it in my downloads folder. But I can now come and drop it in, for example, a SQL tool, like in this case, Squirrel SQL. And you can see I've got I've built one with the model I've created, and I've got my security information in there, my token, and I'm able to make a connection. If we look at it, again, we can see the tables, and if I look at the tables, all the metadata is there. So tools, like Tableau, like Power BI, that are going to look up metadata information, they're going to find it just as if it was a Postgres or something like that. And I can do some tests here. So let's look at this guy. So in this case, I'm looking at a couple tables, right? I'm looking at top sales products and stores, and I want to join them on the store key. And if I just go ahead and click that, I can get the information back pretty quickly. So it's going to behave just like a standard relational database, even though it's a REST application that really I'm the only one in the world who has it right now. And finally, I'll just show you really quickly within Tableau, I can go ahead and make a connection again, just really pointing to the JDBC URL. And in this case, I've just done it fairly simple. I just pulled one table in, but I can do things like report on sales by country, looking at how much money we brought in for the sum of the products from each country and how much it actually costs us internally, just to get a feel for the profit margins on these things. Or I could just drill down and get similar information by city within the US, and we can see from colors the ones that are doing a little better. And finally, I can look at things like the products that we're doing best with by different countries, and kind of go down the list and see that. And then just the last thing, I can look at similar information just by a single country. So all this is to show is that an application that did not have a connector, it's really easy to make a connector through the Autonomous REST connector and be able to use it with standardized tools. And, you know, I could do things, you know, more complex if I wanted to, you know, like where I did a join before, I can just kind of drag over here and say something like store key and then store key, and just go ahead and it'll do the join for me. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to show you. Just the idea is that even though an application, you know, may just be unique to your own company, or it may be, you know, not as widely used in the industry, it's still very important to, you know, to you, and you need to be able to get access to the data and be able to utilize it, you know, effectively. And with the Autonomous REST connector, we're able to support you with these kind of bespoke applications, including things with, you know, more complex than average authentication authorization. And just really quickly, you can see it is in fact live data and not an extract, which is something you wouldn't get with like a web data connector or even OData. And so I think at this point, I think I am good to go. And you know what? I am going to turn it back to you, Todd, for any questions that we might have.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. I appreciate that. I'm going to turn on my camera for this part, if you don't mind doing the same. Yeah, we had a few questions come in while the webinar was going on. Looks like the first one was within the first few minutes, actually. How does Progress DataDirect ensure data connectivity across diverse data sources?
Okay. Well, just now we looked at the Autonomous REST connector, which is going to give you SQL access to most REST APIs and many SaaS applications. But beyond that, Progress DataDirect has data connectivity to a number of relational databases, big data, NoSQL data sources, other SaaS applications, cloud data warehouses. So we have a number of commercial connectors also, in addition to Arc. And beyond that, another product, Hybrid Data Pipeline, that's actually a server-based solution, which can simplify data connectivity in a hybrid environment, meaning you have both cloud and on-premises data and applications. With HDP, you were able to go from like cloud to ground without needing a VPN. And we can also allow you to OData enable your data sources, which can be useful too.
All right, appreciate it. Let's see, we have a few more that rolled in. Let me get to the question panel. Give me a second. How does DataDirect handle security and compliance, particularly when connecting to sensitive data in cloud or on-premises environments?
Yeah,
Always
so
security questions come in, yep.
yeah. We're definitely very security conscious at DataDirect, understanding the importance of it and the implications of that, to the point where we can provide like just information as far as the drivers themselves, what's included in them. In the case of Arc and the other DataDirect drivers, will support data encryption over the wire with TLS or SSL, some people still call it. We'll support modern authentication methods. Just now we talked about Arc supporting different OAuth 2 grant flows, as well as basic auth, user ID, password, URL parameters, even AWS authentication. So, and we briefly mentioned that it can support custom authentication scenarios where there's like an additional level of authentication, maybe an extra step beyond even just OAuth 2. So we take it very seriously as far as authentication, authorization, and data over the wire being encrypted and safe.
Okay, great. I have another one. We actually have two more in the queue. This one is, can you share some examples of how organizations have used DataDirect to overcome challenges like data latency or bandwidth limitations in analytics workflows?
Yeah, so in the case of autonomous REST connector, we're obviously not going to be able to perform better than the REST API itself. That will, we'll be working with that. But we do provide options to reduce latency and to improve performance. One example might be a well-designed REST API will support pagination. So rather than trying to bring back all the data just in one, big chunk of data, it'll come back in smaller bits. So the benefit of that is it's easier for the client application to handle, but also the data starts coming back more immediately. So supporting pagination is going to reduce latency. And what Autonomous REST Connector can do in this case also is to create parallel threads and divide that large workload. So rather than a single thread bringing back the chunks of data in the pages, we can do it in parallel and get it back quicker. So that's definitely a performance improvement when dealing with large result sets.
All right. Looks like we have another one. As I mentioned, with it being 2025, there has to be a question about AI. What features of DataDirect make it particularly well suited for supporting emerging analytics technologies such as AI and machine learning?
Yep. So yeah, definitely pretty hot topic. DataDirect, the drivers can be used to provide data for retrieval augmented generation, or sometimes known as RAG. We see people using large language models, and they're expensive. It takes a long time to kind of train them. And even then, they can be limited in specific domain knowledge, or even things like if you want to use it for something that is specific to your own company, the large language models are going to have no knowledge of that contextual information. The other thing is, they train up to a certain point, but there may be newer data that is not included in the large language models. So by using retrieval augmented generation with, in this case, DataDirect drivers, you're able to augment the large language models with maybe an internal knowledge base, or maybe just some additional context information. By doing this, you're gonna improve the accuracy of the answers provided from the language models. You're gonna reduce hallucinations. I just saw today, I think, somebody calling those confabulations. I had never heard that before, but basically that's where the large language model, you're gonna get an answer and it's gonna seem legit. I mean, you can't tell by looking. It's just, it's out of nothing. It's just a complete hallucination. So by adding the contextual data, you're able to greatly reduce that and improve the accuracy and trustworthiness. So as part of a retrieval augmented generation solution, we have a Progress data platform, which is a new product. DataDirect drivers can work in conjunction with a couple other Progress products like MarkLogic and Semaphore, and in doing so, improve the accuracy of AI-generated responses. It also potentially could reduce time to deployment and definitely provide cost savings. So, yeah.
All right, excellent, excellent. Well, Dennis, that looks like all the questions that we have. With that said, I want to thank you for all the information that you provided for everyone on the line today. And for everyone on the line today, of course, this has been recorded, and we will send it out to all of you on this recording, and those that registered and were unable to attend today. And as always, if you have any questions for Progress DataDirect, we're always available, and we look forward to hearing about your use cases and seeing how we could potentially be a partner to your company. With that said, this ends the webinar, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you all.